The way people search, find apartments clearly is under disruption. I mean, it's changing pretty rapidly.
Apartments is still heavily listings. Last data we saw was like 60% of dollars spent on listings. And overall, I think their marketing spend is still low compared to most industries. It's less than 1% of revenue. And many folks haven't moved over to like running stuff on Google search or SEO or whatever, their own website property. So I think people are going, like, the industry is going to take time, and you're going to see them shift away from ILS first to then more their own property first, and then see how the rest of the NLG stuff shakes out before they jump straight there. I think it would be a hard switch, particularly for these owners that are more about protecting their wealth. They're not some fast growing startup that's like, we got to break stuff. Okay, welcome to the Digible Dudes Podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, you and I have talked about Bill Simmons before. You said you used to read Bill Simmons, but you...
Yeah, did love his sports stuff. I didn't make the, transition over to his new stuff.
Yeah.
Which is broader, but you keep telling me that it's who's in the movie. Like, what's that segment that you were saying I would love?
Rewatchables.
Rewatchables.
That's a specific podcast
that's
feed.
Okay.
So he has they must have like a dozen feeds, but they got acquired. The Ringer got acquired by Spotify, and so they took all the podcasts over there. But Rewatchables I knew you'd like because it's him, but plus movies, which
good combo,
good cross section for you.
Yep.
But they do this thing at the kind of towards the end of each of those Rewatchables. It's called Half-Ass Internet Research. And I feel like that's what we're about to jump into.
You nailed it. You said you had a good way to lead into this, and I think you were right.
Yeah.
That perfectly sets us up here.
Yeah. So the nice thing about half-assed internet research is we're calling it out, and we could be wrong.
Yeah.
But basically, that's all we have.
Gives us some latitude.
Yeah.
Some forgiveness, hopefully.
Yeah. So specifically, we just learned about the Redfin and Zillow partnership. And I only learned about
operative word partnership.
Exactly, yeah. I only learned about it because Nicole was saying that it just happened. She's like, were you aware? I was like, since my walkabout, I've gone dark on everything. I didn't tell you
Good
this.
for you.
But unsubscribing from my amount of...
Trump was elected.
I heard of this.
Yeah.
I wasn't totally aware of
make sure the big stuff you're aware of. Yeah.
I wasn't sure of the day he took office, but I learned he's in power now.
Yeah.
So the she mentioned it, and I was like, oh, my unsubscribing of podcasts. That was one of the sad things. It's like, I was super up on all my business podcasts and things, and then as I look at it, it's obvious that my wheel of life that we talked about on a prior episode, it was so slanted towards business because like 70% of my podcasts were business or whatever, and not necessarily like current events. I just had a couple of those, more of the like business building type stuff. And it's kind of sad to see them go, for me to like unfollow each of those podcasts. It's like you're like it's like deleting a friend from your phone.
Yeah.
Or something is what it felt like.
Letting go a part of your identity.
Yeah.
We got into that. Yeah.
It'd be nice if you could like archive it and be like, I'll check back in on you later. But the only option I had was to unfollow. Anyway, so I wasn't aware of this, but Nicole mentioned that some of our client services people are starting to get pinged by former clients and current clients that were impacted, and was just like, this would be a good topic for you guys to jump into. So hence my half-assed internet research on Redfin and Zillow.
Is there a three-quarter half-ass or three-quarter research?
Half an ass?
Half an ass
75% ass?
Yeah. So I don't even know if we're at half yet. But I was informed of this by Trevor. Trevor Park had hit me up, and he knows that we have some positions open, and thought there might be some folks over there that are impacted that we'd be interested in talking to. So, and what I heard from him was that a good portion of the rent agency was impacted. At least that was my understanding, which is surprising. They've become not one of our bigger competitors, but they're certainly competing with digital services. And it seems still somewhat early stages, but, how long do you think it's been? Probably 4 or 5 years since they've gotten air quotes serious, because I know that they were dabbling, but it feels like they've been pushing hard for the last 4 or 5 years. And so therefore, hearing about this partnership and the impact, I think it's 450 employees is what's right now on the internet as far as folks impacted, but it doesn't really say within what division, but it sounds like most of it is on Rent Dot versus, within Zillow or Redfin. And so I can't imagine that they have much more than maybe 700 to 1,000 employees. I could be way off there. But needless to say, it's a huge portion of formerly known as Apartment Guide, rebranded as Rent Dot, that have been impacted. And so immediately I'm, of course, like all of us, wondering why. It's got to be because of, the stock price, and this is something that they felt was going to drive shareholder value, but that's pretty surface level, So I'm curious. This is what it's about, right? Let's speculate. But can you, where I'll probably go with this eventually, as far as why I think this might have happened. But
yeah, let's hit the top line. So the first news that we saw announced was just that Zillow is going to become the exclusive
multifamily inventory for Redfin. So all Redfin units will now be syndicated through Zillow.
Yeah.
Which puts them in a little bit more competitive. They didn't say anything about this, but with CoStar.
Yeah. Right. And what I saw from at least the financial implications was that Zillow agreed to pay Redfin $100 million for that syndication right, which is super interesting. So that must mean...
Seems like a drop in the bucket, though, doesn't it? These days?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially because if I remember correctly, and I think I have it here, Redfin got acquired for like $600 million in 2021. Redfin acquired RentPath for $608 million.
Right.
So if you think about it, it's like in this case, Zillow didn't have to go out and buy them for the $600. Instead, they pay $100. Now, I don't know the length of that licensing. The $100 million, is $100 million a year. But even if it was, it's like it gives them a good kick in the rear. Zillow. And the other numbers I saw was that Zillow currently only has 50,000 properties advertising on its platform, which compared to the numbers we saw from CoStar before, which is north of 100,000, you would think that Redfin would give them a good shot in the arm too to get that up.
Yep.
Into they've always talked about this super app strategy, Zillow, anyways, to kind of own real estate. So it makes a lot of sense in a way for Zillow, right? But it's interesting for Redfin, except for I guess it's more. If I remember correctly, I haven't looked at the stock price. I'll have to pull that up. But the stock price after the acquisition, I remember Redfin had started to tank. But that's the acquisition was in 21 when things were really frothy, and so afterwards,
right,
kind of makes sense.
Well, it may be them realizing, and perhaps a little later than they'd like, that Rent Dot or Apartment Guide wasn't carrying their weight, right? And so they need it all to go through Zillow. It's like, this is we're kind of bleeding out over here, at least on the directory side of things, that people weren't buying into. I keep tripping over what I should call it. I mean, I'm looking at the site, it's Rent Dot, so I'm going to keep using that.
Well, it's also interesting.
But there's so much attrition there, right? And it's like Zillow has more upside, and so let's run everything through there. I don't know if they'll go as far as actually sunsetting Rent Dot. It's probably just going to be used as some sort of legacy syndicate.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, we can end up getting into the speculation of what it means, because you think about, so from a business perspective, Redfin's sitting at just over $1 billion in total market cap. And so think about it, this is a 10% of your market cap that you're getting a year. The savings, or not the savings, but the cost of the severances and other for this restructuring is estimated to be somewhere between 18 and 21 million. So let's just say 20 million. But if you have to pay 20 million for the 100 million, you get 80 million back, and it's still a significant portion of your market cap, and you don't have to deal with it. And then we can do some quick math on what those 450 employees would be plus burden. Yeah, I mean, that's probably, even if if the employee plus burden with office space and stuff was $100,000 for employees, that would be $45 million a year in savings, plus office space and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's just at $100,000. Mm-hmm. Super interesting. So it makes sense from let's get tight and profitable, from the Redfin side, but also it makes you wonder, would this be then Redfin like long term? Because they did a partnership before, I had seen Redfin and Zillow, where they were sort of cross helping one another with brand new construction stuff. And so it's like, okay, that was it's like the bullets and cannons. That's a tiny bullet.
Mm-hmm.
This is a much bigger bullet. And then is the idea with Redfin, like, okay, let's get really tight with Zillow and then be an acquisition target for them.
Mm-hmm.
Especially now that with the new administration that you mentioned, like the speculation is that they'll be more friendly to mergers and acquisitions than the last administration.
Yep, definitely. Well, I wonder, when we say 450 employees and you mentioned all the savings, there's also usually work and revenue associated with those 450.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a net like 45 million. I would assume they're divesting, from certain business units, if not several. And that's what, for us piqued our interest, is how much of this is that, their future, or at least how they were describing it, which was more around digital solutions, services, digital advertising, brand management, things like that, instead of just the directory stuff. And then who's picking up that work? So are they, is this a consolidation or divestment, I guess is what I'm wondering, with the 450 employees.
Seems like a divestment.
That's what I agree. So then what's the time period? Obviously, I mean, it can't happen overnight. But something like this is not also going to be drawn out probably much more than six months.
Yeah, the severance stuff that I saw looked like it was supposed to be wrapped by July.
There you go.
So
just inside of 6 months.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick little timeline. And then with the digital agency arm, as you were saying, that seemed like it got serious like 5 years or so ago. It's interesting. Like, well, yeah, just I wonder what they're going to do with those. Like, where are they going to like move the client somewhere? Because you don't want a lot of what we were hearing from them is that there was a lot of cross-selling between the listings and the digital. And what you would want to do is from a client services perspective, is make sure that they land somewhere good, because you don't want them the bad, karma to hit you that like, man, you guys botched my Google campaigns or whatever. Now I don't need your listings anymore.
Totally. Guilty by association.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, hopefully somebody was educating about this before they moved into the digital services, but the margins are going to be far different than what they, were accustomed to with their directory or their ILS. And so that's what I was saying. You knew I'd get there eventually, but coming from media, for me, more so on the broadcast and then to print, you're looking at 80-90% margins on a lot of that media. And then, they were losing it in chunks to digital. Then they realized digital's, trading, dimes for dollars, I guess. And it was a rude awakening. And then they spent all this money to build out that, we'll call it infrastructure, but, the payroll, the technology, the marketing, which only, compounds the problem, much less the actual margins themselves on what you can really get out in the market. And it forced them to almost accelerated probably their financial crisis, And so I'm just wondering, did that replay itself, but for the first time in this industry, because no other ILS has really gone there, which has surprised me. And now I wonder if that will keep that from happening in the future, or if somebody else will be, I don't know if they're bold enough, but to take a second swing at that. So what I mean is we'll use the big green gorilla, but CoStar has dabbled mostly, I think, in social, right? They haven't done anything else, but to me that's dabbling. Have they done their own smack recipe? And it's like, we will never enter into paid media,
right?
But we can get comfortable with this because it's all part of the branding of a community, and so we'll go ahead and experiment with, the social side of things, which typically are going to have more favorable margins. I mean, they're still not going to be on the same clip as what they're getting from their directories. But yeah, I'm just, speculating that that's what happened again, is this equation doesn't work. And if you're Redfin and you're thinking about shareholder value and enterprise value, it's almost like an anchor, right? To have the service side. If it's, it's small single digits, or if it's even profitable at all. It's like, how much is this really helping us versus it's hurting us?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not like part of the hedgehog, right? Like Jim Collins.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is like I feel like services, if done really well, kind of how Digible's done it, white glove, it can become the center hedgehog of your wheel, and then you can sort of like shoot out and add other less complicated products on. But it's almost like if you have the less complicated product being listings, and then you add on this complex product, it's sort of I would imagine
backwards.
As a customer, it would feel kind of like confusing if you're then not treating me. Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Ass backwards?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then and you're not used to giving it the same type of support versus like you used to always say this even on this podcast in the early days. You're like, we built ourselves around very low margin things, and then it's like then it allows you to add high margin on later, and you already are practiced at being super frugal versus the other way where you have more fat. But it's also really interesting. There's a couple things that could have gone through Redfin's mind where it's like, well, we think Google search is about to get disrupted anyways. And that's a real pillar of the services side. And if you think that, then it's like, then why continue to fight that battle and invest and get those lower margins versus, and now we had heard that Redfin was trying to do this almost like one-click set up an automation to run those services, right? Which is also interesting because we've met a lot of those providers that were trying to give them that technology in order to do it. And I remember those providers being very happy about getting those pilots and those contracts. And now, where does that leave those folks, right? Like if you had built your startup around, I remember one guy in particular thought he had like a 7-figure agreement that he was going to net off that deal, and it.
Being the underlying technology that's powering these digital services.
And then I just feel really bad for those startups that sort of hang their hat on that one big enterprise client. And
that's the risk, feast or famine.
But to your point, just to wrap on that thing, I think my thought would be it is a cautionary tale for those other ILSs. Like, okay, services is hard. Not that we couldn't try to do it differently, but also there's a big moving landscape here with all the natural language, and will Google search remain strong or not? Like you probably, back to the 20-mile march or whatever of Jim Collins, you probably want to play it safe and let other people try to innovate and figure it out if you're CoStar, right? You don't want to risk. Yeah, that's probably why they haven't gone into it anyways. They don't want to risk,
Not until they have to, and they seem still pretty far away from that. I don't know if I should add the word sadly, but they still seem to be capable of not just maintaining, but growing their customer base and growing their revenue, which don't always go hand in hand, just meaning that their rates continue to go up. So, but you raise an interesting point, maybe a bigger conversation for us to have. I don't know if that should be segmented, or if we should squeeze that in here. Bigger conversations should never be squeezed, David. Is the whole search and SEO. I mean, certainly we have our eye on that, like a lot of digital agencies, especially those that specialize in demand gen, performance-based marketing, whatever, is... where are things headed now that you're seeing more and more competition, and we can put that in perspective. I don't know what the latest is, but ChatGPT, I think, is now has taken 4% of Google's search share or something like that. But just meaning the way people find apartments clearly is under disruption. I mean, it's changing pretty rapidly, in my opinion. So. How do you, what are we forecasting for the next few years? And if you were giving some advice to Digible, Mr. Owner's Box, what would it be? Is, take more of, let's call it since we mentioned CoStar, but let's wait for somebody else to figure this out first instead of trying to figure it out ourselves. Or would you, start doing some, I don't know if it's experimentation, but more of that productive paranoia using Jim Collins, where it's like, let's really start thinking about this and trying to do some scenario planning here, with, of course, no expectation or plan that tomorrow, like fundamentally, like things start changing at Digible. But yeah, I'm just wondering how much you think that digital agencies, and we'd be in that group, should be doing thought experiments or exercises to prepare for some of these inevitable changes that the large language libraries are facilitating.
Well, I always think it's healthy to do some thought experiments, just not constantly.
Hence the productive paranoia versus just paranoia.
Right, and so that may be ahead of annual planning or something, and maybe there's some small tests. But if I back up, Digible's in a really strong position. So and this market is very insulated, as we've seen time and time again. And the first thought that comes to mind is like I'm not aware of a lot of examples where I guess segments or whatever jump several technologies ahead and skip. So for example, Singapore, the U.S., internet started in the U.S., and then we did it over telephone lines, and then we laid cable, and then we did fiber, and then we went to 5G. Singapore kind of got started late, and they didn't like start on telephone lines, and then they didn't lay cable. They just went straight to fiber. They did some of the early stuff, but basically that's where they invested. I don't see that happen a ton where you're like, hey, you know what? We're going to wait 2 or 3 technology generations before we like bring it on board for an industry. And so I'm saying that because apartments is still heavily listings. Last data we saw was like 60% of dollars spent on listings. And overall, I think their marketing spend is still low compared to most industries. It's less than 1% of revenue. And many folks haven't moved over to like running stuff on Google search or SEO or whatever, their own website property. So I think people are going, like the industry is going to take time, and you're going to see them shift away from ILS first to then more their own property first, and then see how the rest of the NLG stuff shakes out before they jump straight there. I think it would be a hard switch, particularly for these owners that are more about protecting their wealth versus, you know, they're not some fast-growing startup that's like, we got to break stuff, right? So since they want to protect it, I think they'll just say, well, I know this thing works, and I'll move over there first, and that could take a decade while the rest of this stuff shakes out. So even like when we first entered this industry, you and I were huge fans of Apartment List. We're like, who wouldn't want to pay per lead? This makes total sense. And from an outsider coming in, I would have thought like that they've nailed it. They're going to get it. And obviously, we know being in the industry now, that's not the case. So I still don't see someone even...
Meaning that they're not eating everybody up because they are successul.
Sure, they're successful, but they're not like... It's not like
they're not running away with it,
It's not like Google versus Yahoo. Or something.
Right. Yep.
And so I don't see the same thing happening with all of the other ILSs that we know are testing different types of AI, like this NLG. They're not building it from scratch. They're just using someone else's tool set and trying to productize it. But I don't see someone, cracking the genie out of the bottle or something and taking over from as you said, the green gorilla. So therefore, I think Digible, it's like keep doing what's working. It's safe for now. Keep doing some bullets every now and then before taking cannonballs. But I wouldn't get. I'd be cautionary to get too reaching.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree. I think it's more maybe within our own services and others like us, how we might be thinking about the SEO portion of this versus the paid search. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a while before, that's impacted significantly, materially in this industry in particular. And I always try to remind, whether it's sometimes even internally, but certainly with clients and marketers, like, the magic of Google, at least on the advertising side, is it's performance based. You don't pay unless somebody's actually clicking on something. Doesn't always mean that's a good lead, but I'm just saying like that protects them for as long as you can theorize. It's like, so what's my downside?
ILS, right? You pay if someone saw it or didn't see
right,
it.
exactly. And that's part of why I've said so many times, like when or why aren't ILSs adopting Google's model? It just doesn't make sense to me. Anyways, I'll stop myself from getting off on that soapbox.
Now, putting on our Zillow-Redfin hat, do you, from what you know of those organizations, do you think it's a win-win for both, or would you have done it if you were running both orgs? Is there an org?
That's speculation to the nth degree.
Totally.
Just
half-assed formed opinion.
yeah, seriously. I'm still going to go 3/4 ass or 1/4, because that would be more appropriate, I guess, the 1/4. Well, it doesn't seem like the rent experiment, and I don't know if this is even the right way to set this up, or the thought process that they went through is delivering what they were expecting. And so they had to make a move, and based on some of the even back of the napkin math you were doing on the savings, the severance, the 100 on the 20, like the 10% of the market cap, like on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's much downside to either company.
Yeah, I think it just depends. Like, what I don't know is Redfin's like vivid vision, right? Like,
that's what I'm saying. I don't know what they're ultimately aiming for, what their long-term goals are, and so it's really hard to say, back to speculation to the nth degree, like whether this was a win-win or not.
Yeah.
But on the surface, when you just do those numbers, like, you made it sound like a pretty smart decision.
Financial decision for sure. Particularly for now, for the short term. Who knows? Again, like if you have the right for the long, like maybe they're more, which it seems like that they mentioned their press release being now they can put more attention on brokerage services, and it seems almost like the back office stuff for their agents, which is interesting. And we're so blind to what that
exactly
may or may not be for them, that advertising is like, you're dealing with then again, you're dealing with agents. It's a lot of SMBs too, but to figure out 2 SMB markets is a lot, right? And so it's like you could at least concentrate on what your core was. And then for Zillow, well, I'll jump in first, but it seems to me like I'd be like high-fiving. It's like you said, it seems like a drop in the bucket. Now I get this massive inventory. I've been struggling to get into that space for years. This will give me a shot in the arm. And then the question is, how do they go about it? Like, do they hire up a huge sales team to attack multifamily like CoStar has, or are they still going to go more of the almost like self-serve model, which is kind of like the way they've done their real estate side?
Yeah, I don't know. But where does this leave Rent Dot, or Apartment Guide or RentPath or what? I'd be, clearly many of them are looking for jobs, but just do you think it will be some sort of legacy syndicate?
Sure.
At what point do you let go of the brand?
It doesn't seem like any of those brands have ever been let go. Meaning like the websites. Like if it's like his Apartment Guide getting it shut down or rent.com shut down, it doesn't seem that way. Google doesn't really pay attention to this press release when it's looking through its rankings and stuff.
Yeah, so still some value there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you, it just seems like you wouldn't let go. Like I was trying to think of like some of those, like Lovely or whatever was one of those websites. Like there's a lot of these like long tail ILS websites that have existed and people still keep them live. I don't know what the maintenance cost is to keep them live, but
do you go to market then if you, are they still going with Rent Dot, or is that just for online apartment seekers that will bump into that ILS versus like actively selling it? They've already been kind of bruised, not just bruised, punched in the gut a couple of times, meaning Apartment Guide over the years, and I can't imagine, I guess, trying to sell right now. Like I'm not trying to create too dire and make anyone out there feel worse than they already do, but I would struggle working there and knocking on doors and trying to bring in business, because there's just got to be all sorts of doubt. Not to mention divesting. Clearly divesting from their future.
What's so interesting about this is obviously we both have a Yellow Page experience, and in that world, the Yellow Page world, there was a bit of a winner-take-all market. It wasn't totally winner-take-all. You'd still have like the main Yellow Pages of that geo.
I was going to say locally it was kind of a winner-take-all.
You'd have smaller, so it wasn't that there was zero other competitors. There'd be, whatever. There'd be, depending on your market, there'd be like YP versus Dex or whatever. So there were other, there would be other, but there was clearly like when they dropped on your doorstep, you had one that was like 2,000 pages and there's one that's 150 pages.
Usually based on a local telco.
Yeah, exactly. And that seems very similar to what's shaking out here, which is not what I would have thought. Like I would have been like, the internet Like anybody can win, and there's like you have the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal or whatever, right? Each can find their own niche and whatever. But CoStar has done just such a bang up job in this space of becoming kind of like that 2,000-page Yellow Page book, and then the rest of them are the 150 pages. And it's not that you can't have a business like you were just talking. Apartment List has been winning in their own way. It's just there's a clear dominant player, and I just, again, from the outside looking in, I wouldn't have figured that it would shake out that way.
Totally. I still don't understand why there isn't a Chat GPT strictly for this industry. And maybe I answered my own question, is why would you build it if there's already GPT? But isn't that, I mean, I know you and I've talked about it, and I speculate about the whole voice, apartment broker, in your kitchen. But I mean, before we even get there, like, why wouldn't people start using GPT to find apartments? Like, and so I'm just, that to me is going to be the big disruption for CoStar. It's like, unless they themselves start investing in that, but I don't know that they know how, back to the way we built our business, that would crush them. It's totally innovator's dilemma. It's like that would cannibalize the crap out of their revenue.
I think you wait for someone else to start to do that, and then you buy them. It's like the typical playbook, right?
And stomp them out, or do you, because I don't know that you can stop that train as far as what consumers, like how they'd want to look. So Google does that, obviously Meta, they're constantly buying companies and then they just kill the technology. This is not something you can stamp out.
Yeah, I think
then it would still jack with your revenue, right? Even if you buy them, it's like, because there's not really an advertising model yet for that. So when you go to GPT, if you're searching for an apartment, nobody's making money on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're right. Sometimes if the technology is like bespoke, is that they can buy it and then they can put it on the shelf. Famously, Google bought the DeepMind team, which is the innovators of GPT, basically. They wrote the white paper that ChatGPT, OpenAI built their thing on. And they bought that DeepMind like 20 years ago. And so they let it sit on the shelf for 20 years before all of a sudden OpenAI takes off. So then
line their
Google's
coffers for 20 years.
Yeah, and then Google's like, oh, shoot, I guess we should catch up. And then they've decided to catch up, but they're not shutting down search, right? They're just trying to figure it out. I think the reason they had to do it that way is because they then saw the genie had left the bottle. Like, they couldn't now like just buy OpenAI and squash it, because now people had seen the magic and realized it came from this one white paper. So then other people can kind of replicate it, and they have been. So it's super interesting. That also is a different thread that it would be good to have one of our tech folks or whatever on the podcast. But it's like, why did it sort of almost sit on a shelf for like 10 years or whatever? It's like this, like the best hidden or the best secret in plain sight or something. It's like, oh, it's open. Anybody can go read this paper. And then all of a sudden, like, everyone's like, oh shoot, there was magic. Like they turned lead into gold, kind of thing. So anyways, to your point, like, I guess like if I was CoStar, I'd wait till someone figured it out, try to buy them. Cause I think then use them. Cause I don't think you could then, if they built it on one of these other natural language things, they wouldn't probably be able to squash it, because somebody else could just use the tools as well.
Yeah. Well, shall be interesting. I think, we've covered it, as well as we can. We don't want to get down to the 1/8 ass, opinions or baked research. So we need to have a follow-up, but I think it probably is going to take a month or two before we'll have meaningful enough updates.
Well, if anybody out there's listening and they have someone that really knows this well, or would be willing to come on and chat with us, send them our way. Hello at Digible, and we'll get them on. It'd be fun, even if we have to cloak them. It's like I was
going to say subject line deep throat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we can have them like
we'll meet you in the parking garage.
We'll shade their face, do a voice altering, whatever. That'd be fun. Yeah. So, anyways, shoot them over if you know somebody. But we'll see you guys next time.